Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. I thought I'd do a video today talking about what I think each nation needs in the upcoming updates just to make it a little bit more whole. And the reason for this is even though some nations are in much better positions than others, that doesn't mean that any nation is perfect and generally does need a little bit of help. Now, when it comes to this stuff, it would be nice to hear your opinions on what you would like to see from different nations, what you think they're missing, what you think they're moving around with, and I'm going to give my thoughts on each nation in this video, so let's get started. The first one is America, or the USA, and it is pretty obvious what has been missing from this nation for a long time, and also something that has been solved for a long time in other nations, and it is of course some mid-tier SPAA. Now, America can counter a lot of planes at these BRs, basically because they have some very good planes of their own, but it's a lot harder to get into, and also, at the same time, not really a great counter. You can see here with this wonderful, beautifully long line, that America is missing out a lot of areas for AAs, everywhere from 4.0 all the way to 7.7, which is quite a lot of the meta BRs for America, just doesn't have any SPAAs. And even though a lot of their vehicles have 50 cals, it still doesn't make up for the fact that there isn't something similar to what other nations have got recently, whether it's the Zastora from Germany, which was added in, or even the Kugel that's been there for ages, or for the USSR, stuff like, of course, the M5359 and the BTR-ZD, which turned up. So for America, that has to be the thing that's focused on. For Germany, there's a few issues, but they're kind of issues which are seen a lot around the game. The first one is just the top-tier compression. We talked about this when we spaded the 2A7V. If you have a look at the top tier of Germany, the 2A5, the 2A6, the 2PSO, and also the 2A7V are all at the same BR. Now, you could probably make an argument for specifically the 2PSO and maybe the 2A6 being at 11.7, but the 2A5 being even equal to the 2A7V is ridiculous. The 2A7V is better in every single way. Better gun, it has the same reload, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. The mobility is slightly worse on the 2A7V, but incredibly slightly worse. Has much better thermals and also spore liners, meaning it's way more survivable. So yeah, this area is just a problem, right? They need to have a look at trying to expand the BRs up, so it makes a lot more sense to actually play some of these over others. The other thing is just the 10.3 to 11.7 gap. This is a problem in a lot of tech trees, and it's because of some of the BR changes that they've made. You just straight up go from 10.3 to 11.7. So if you're a person who is grinding through this tech tree and you want to play in 11.7 quickly, and you've only researched this area, which you'd need to unlock it, you are going to be running a bunch of 10.3s with one 11.7, and that 11.7 is easily worse than the other 11.7s that are around. So yeah, it's a bit rough and not great. The other one for ground is the 6.7 to 7.7 hole. This is also prevalent in a lot of tech trees as well. It's not as bad in Germany as others, but it is something to notice, right? You have only the Weasel and the Kugelblitz at 7.0 and 7.3. You have a monster 6.7 lineup, and then a pretty good 7.7 and 8.0 set of lineups. So if you don't have the Panther, if you don't have the Tiger 2105 over here, then you just have this huge gap which is sat in the tech tree, and that just sucks. Hopefully they can fill it with something or have some plans to address this, because as I said, this isn't just a Germany issue, this is a few tech trees issue. Another thing in Germany is the addition of more jets at rank 5. So when you go from the planes or the propellers of Germany at rank 4, which most of them are actually really fun to play, especially since a lot of them got down BR'd, once you get to rank 5, you run into a lot of vehicles that have been in the game for a long time and they don't really feel great. Specifically stuff like the ME262s. The ME262s are not great starter jets. If you are a person who's just starting to play jets, you don't want to play these as a starter vehicle because of the fact that they have low velocity guns, and also they're not very fast compared to a lot of the competition that they fight. Many of these vehicles as well now have to deal with the 8.3 monsters that were moved down from 8.7, such as the MiG-15 Bis, which is just not a fair fight. You also have the Jabbo, the Horton, which at least is a bit unique, and of course the Arados, which do jobs, and then the 163s, which are in weird places, but they're always going to be. So rank 5 is just a really awkward area for Germany, and if you are a person who this is your first experience in jets, it is a really rough experience to have, just because there isn't really many vehicles here that actually work very well in the current metas. For USSR, there's a lot less holes that, need filling, but they do have the same kind of issue as Germany. A lot of these starter jets you get access to, whether it be the MiG-9s or the Yak-15s and 17s, are fun, but they do have kind of big issues with them as you actually start playing them. You start realizing with the MiG-9s that their guns are a little bit awkward, but also they are slow compared to a lot of the competition now, and that's just something that's happened over time and will continue to happen going forward if they keep down BRing stuff from 8.7. So, yeah, it's pretty nuts. By the way, I'm in arcade, so let's just change that for you. But it's pretty nuts that something like a standard MiG-9 can see a MiG-15 BIS now. That is just crazy. So, yeah, there's a lot of vehicles here which are in rough places, and hopefully they can have a look at maybe introducing vehicles which are a bit easier on the player to actually start with. For the other part of USSR, the transition from destroyers to cruisers is a little bit rough. The Kavkaz and the Krim are okay, but they're two vehicles which very much have very different playstyles. And then also, there's a lot of vehicles here with the USSR which don't make a lot of sense. The best for Chadney being a 4.0 instead of 4.3, and then also the transition from taking these ones and then getting into the cruisers. There isn't a lot of vehicles here, and therefore you have to wait a few, researched vehicles to be able to get through them to have a proper lineup, and also even then you can have really tough times with it. So yeah, the early cruisers are a little bit rough and don't really fit, but everything else in this tech tree, at least from what I've played, has been fun. Britain has exactly the same issue as Germany, basically the jump from 10.3 to 11.7. You do obviously have these challenges at 11.3, but they just don't have a lineup with them. So basically you're running an 11.7 lineup, which still doesn't really have a lineup, but you're still there. So it's not as dire as Germany's one, but it is still a really big issue where you are jumping a huge BR brackets, even if it's just 10.3 to 11.3, to be able to play these things, and that just sucks. The other thing that they're missing is any real high-tier utility. The ADATs, I suppose, is okay, but it's nothing compared to a lot of the SBAAs that's around the place. There's no light tanks here. It's just basically hoping that your challenges do well, and then kind of grinding out a bunch of planes, such as the Harrier GR7, to be able to do well too. And that is not very good. It's not great to see. Generally, just having this huge gap here is a big problem, and there needs to be some either light tanks or even just things at like 10.0 that could be run at these BRs to give a little bit more use to some of these vehicles. The other one is jet BRs. When a lot of vehicles went down in BR, so basically the Sabres and the MiG-15s mainly, there was a ton of vehicles that were just completely forgotten about. The Scimitar, which does hold its own okay right now, but still in a rough place. The Swifts, which are fast and very fun to play, but once again, just if you are going to move down the other vehicles, you should move down these. And then the Venom. The fact that the Venom is now higher BR than a Sabre, and also higher BR than the MiG-15 BIS, is literally laughable. Same with stuff like the Canberras, they're worthless now. So yeah, you basically just nuked a whole BR bracket here. The Hunter F1 didn't even go down. And the F6 is still at 9.7. So there's a lot of dead weight here in kind of like the middle areas for aircraft, and that kind of sucks, or for jets, sorry, because the Meteors are actually pretty fun early on. The Vampire's not too bad, but it just has a lot of vehicles here which are unique and interesting to play. But basically, because of the fact that these three nations got focused on trying to save their BRs, now a lot of these are left in very, very awful situations. Japan, the early ground ranks are awful. They're really, really poor. Pretty much this whole rank 1 experience is bad. There isn't a redeeming vehicle here. Even stuff like the Chiha Kai nowadays is a vehicle which doesn't penetrate enough to be able to deal with a lot of the vehicles it faces. So I would like to see something added here just to make it a little bit more welcoming to a new player and to actually have a bit of fun with, because right now it just isn't there, and that's a bit of a problem. The Blue Water is kind of the same, but more mid-tiers. You have this weird set of BRs of 47 and 50 where you have just a bunch of vehicles which make no sense being at the same BRs. So you got the Isuzu, you got the Kako, the Kuma, the Sendai, and also the Agano, I suppose, but mainly just these 4 vehicles here. These early cruisers are not very good. They don't have a lot of armor. They don't really do anything. They have very awkwardly placed guns, which is the main issue I have with them. And yeah, they're just not great to play. So these ones need a little bit of help in this area. The other one is the Miyoko being at 5.7, even though it is just a straight 6.0. Because of its armament and because of its armor, it's actually equal basically to the Mikuma in terms of its, well, actually no, it's better than the Mikuma in terms of its armament. It's actually equal to the Megami, which is at 6.0. No idea why this thing's 5.7. Somebody could let me know. I would like to know. There's also Jet BRs. There's a huge, massive gap in these areas going from 7.0 to 8.7. You do have the R2Y2s, but as they said many times ago, these are going to get removed at some point. So for me, they need to have a look at this and start adding in a few more CAS aircraft for ground, since many of these vehicles, they have a secondary role as CAS, but also Japan has problems with like meta BRs around here. Like you have like 9.093 and then 11.0 and then 11.7. So you have huge gaps at your high tier ground. So in order to help these, you need CAS aircraft to help them. But you just don't really have them in this tech tree. Like hopefully in the future that can be resolved. China actually doesn't really have that many issues. Their aviation's pretty good nowadays. Their helicopters are pretty good. I suppose they don't have naval, if you want to put that there. And they also have a huge SPAA gap between 5.0 and 8.0, which is basically the same as the one that's there for the US, but their 5.0s are much better than the 4.0s from America. The other thing to also mention is they do have a bit of a problem from 6.7 to 7.7. So once again, just like Germany and a few other nations, there's this massive jump nowadays from 6.7 to 7.7. So there's no 7.0s, there's no 7.3s. It's just a straight bump up, and that actually affected the PLZ-83, which just doesn't have a lineup with it. And if you have a look on the market, you'll see it selling for like $13 or something. And it's just because you can't run it with anything. You're not going to up-BR this thing, like you're not going to up-tier it, it's not going to work, and yeah, you just have this huge area. So another nation that just has this for some reason and would need to be fixed. For Italy, I would first like to focus on the coastal. Their coastal is very poor. There is not a lot of vehicles here that are fun to play. Basically, you have like the Saeta, and also there is like one of these middle ones with 240mm, which is quite fun. But at the same time, there you go, the both is there. But the problem is this coastal tech tree is awful. It's very weak to play and not fun at all. It would be nice if they added some stuff to this to make it a bit more fun. I think Blue Water's not in a bad place. Obviously, the destroyers are bad, but they got down BR'd a lot, so they're in a much better place. For ground, if you really want to be honest about it, they're struggling top tier AAs. And I know, yes, the automatic is here at 11.3, and yes, it's, you know, got a very fun proxy shell and all of that good stuff. As a person who's been playing those BRs, you do not want to play the automatic of those BRs. The automatic will only be useful for people who are rushing in helicopters. If you are actually facing any of the meta machines, the automatic gets completely outranged by them, and it just sucks. So yeah, the multi-role capability of the automatic's fun. It's an enjoyable vehicle. It's great, but it's just in a horrific place. So yeah, not exactly grand. It would be nice to see some kind of SPA here, which can rival stuff like the Pantsir and all of those other vehicles. But right now, that doesn't exist. For France, you have a huge gap once again. 9.7 to 11.7. It's just a lot of nations just have this huge gap, and it's obviously there to try and make it so top tier itself is away from these lower ranks, so you don't get, you know, up tiered into them a lot, and therefore it's a bit easier to play. But this is a 2.0 BR gap. So there's no way you'd get up tiered into it anyway. Right now, 10.0 and 10.3 are also very good BRs. So if you're running 9.3s and 9.7s, which you kind of have to for France, you are running into a brick wall, which isn't very fun to play. So yeah, this would need to be addressed at some point. And also, once again, the idea that the standard Leclerc is the same BR as the S21 or the Azure, especially with different rounds and different mobility, is just kind of silly. So that is something to at least have a look at. It also has the 6.7 to 7.7 issue. You know how people are always asking for like World War II vehicles to not see post-Cold War vehicles? I got a feeling that when it comes to Gaijin, this is like their way of trying to do that for some reason. But because so many nations have this huge gap, and it's just not a positive thing to have. The fact that for good old France, your 7.0 and 7.3 options are 3 SPGs. The AUF1, which is an SBH, the AMX-10M, and the Foch. That's it. So these aren't lineups. These are not things which are going to get you in good places. So yeah, it sucks. It really does. That a lot of nations just have this hole, and it just causes big matchmaking issues for many nations. Also, rank 1 being very poor. Same with Japan. So just needs a bit of help. Just needs a few vehicles to actually look forward to when actually starting a tech tree. The tech tree fun for France starts at 2.7. So, like, going through all of these vehicles is just a way of kind of walking through fire in order to have, you know, the nice food or something. It's just not a worthwhile time. The other thing is no coastal fleet for France. They do have a blue water fleet, and to be honest, I've actually had a good time with it. I haven't played the higher machines, but pretty much everything from the Emile Batin down, I've had a great time. You know, the guns are pretty fun, mobility is okay. Overall, it's a lot of very nice vehicles here. But because they don't have a coastal fleet, you can't really control the battle. Because if you haven't played naval, the coastal is one of those areas which they actually cap the zones. So, you know, win you the battle or lose you the battle. So a lot of the time when you're playing these French machines, you don't actually have control on who wins or loses. You just can do damage. And that can be fun, but let's not kid ourselves. It's still nice to win sometimes. For Sweden, the first thing is rank 1 and 2. The APDS problem that these guys have. So a lot of these vehicles, in order to be useful, you need to get to a rank 4 APDS. Otherwise, you are very much struggling for pen. The worst example of this is the Largo, which has 59mm of pen at 2.7 until you get that APDS round. Now, what I would propose to fix this is just move the APDS to rank 1 or 2, so it's a bit easier for a lot of these vehicles, and they can be a lot more fun. Unfortunately, right now, that isn't happening. But yeah, it's one of those which has been a pet peeve of mine for Sweden for the longest time. I don't like these tech trees where when you start them, it's like, oh, here's like an artificial barrier to make it harder for you to get into this tech tree. Surely we would want to promote people getting into these things and actually having fun. And that would be one of the ways to do it. They did try and do it with some of the Finnish vehicles, and it worked pretty well. Stuff like the BT-42 being very fun, but still, it just move that APDS to a much better position so it's a bit nicer. Also, Sweden doesn't have any naval. Would be nice to see some naval for Sweden. Don't know what that looks like, but it would be cool. And also, there are some jet BRs here, which are a little bit odd between them. You know, the A29, the J29F, the J34, I suppose, has to stay here, mainly because it gets a rank 2 AIM-9B modification. But stuff like the J29F being at 9.0, you know, the fact that that one wasn't moved down and is just kind of stuck there, the A29s being just awful to fly, and then just huge BR gaps. So from 9.3 to 10.3, you have a whole BR difference here. And if you have a look at like the tech tree on ground, you can see something that's very similar, where you go from 9.3 to pretty much 10.3. But there are some 10.0s, there are some 9.7s, and they just don't have capable casts to be able to back them up. It would be kind of cool to see something like that, but right now, it just isn't the case. Sweden doesn't have a huge amount of issues, but that is definitely one of them to at least think about. And then also Israel. I mean, Israel has a lot of problems in War Thunder, stemming from many of the design decisions which were made. Obviously, no crew skills at a lower BR. So a lot of these vehicles feel very clunky because you're basically playing mid-tier vehicles without any crew skills. Specifically, the M51 feels very bad, the M109 does too, the Rochev, and then many of these other vehicles take a lot of time to actually get going and don't really have a great time until you do. They have solved a lot of the BR issues for Israel, which is quite nice, by filling everything full of medium tanks. Which is fair. You know, medium tanks are pretty nice to play, but playing the same ones over and over and over again, not exactly a fun time. The major problem, though, is even though you have all of these medium tanks, you don't really have a ton else. So lack of high tier or what would be classed as mid-tier light tanks for Israel. A lot of nations have 8.0 light tanks, which are very powerful. They also have high-tier light tanks, like 10.0 light tanks, which can work very well. And it would be nice if Israel got any of those to be able to scout, change the battle, and not just play the same way over and over again, which is what you do with Israel. You just play the same thing over and over and over again. You also have no CAS at the lower BRs. If you don't have access to Weizmanns, which you shouldn't have to buy in order to have a CAS element, your closest one you have is the Spitfire Mark 9 with two 250-pounders, or something like a B-17, which is just ridiculous. They also added something to this vehicle. Oh, 250 is nice. So the Meteor and F-13 and the Ouragan get to a point where they're pretty fun to play, but at 7.7. So you have a 6.0 lineup, you have a 4.3, you have a 6.7, you have a 6.3 setup now. All of these, plus the 701, have absolutely no CAS. Right, apart from Weizmanns, and as you go up in BR, that gets worse and worse and worse. So just bring in some kind of CAS element in this area just to help them out. There's also no high-tier SPA that's worth going for. As somebody who's been trying to spade the Chaparral for America, the Israeli Chaparral, I'm sure, is as bad. It can't target helicopters because of IRCMs, or just them not giving off a good enough heat seeker, there you go, or heat signature, sorry. And then also at the same time, it's just one of those missiles that sometimes just feels like it just does what it does. And also to get access to the really nice missile instead of the standard one, which has a very low lock range, you have to get to rank 4 instead of having to get over to here. And you can see the wonderful mod cost of these guys. So 15k and then 22,000, and then to get access to this, it's 14,000. So you need probably about 50,000 RP before you actually get the missile that justifies your BR. And as we know in AAs, it takes a long time to be able to do that. So yeah, not really fun. Then also no Navy, no heavy tanks in the tech tree, hardly any SPGs, so doing challenges is not exactly easy. So yeah, Israel tree has a lot to go. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be added, and I'm sure it'll come in time. So that's my main little like pet peeves about each of the nations and what I would like to see in each of them. I'm sure over time many of these things will get solved, as if you actually have a look at, 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot of issues with many of the other tech trees, mainly with stuff like mid-tier SPAAs, and a lot of them have been solved. It's actually been really, really cool to see. So hopefully with War Thunder, we can see some more stuff which is positive. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day. And I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Tullio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pieman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Alan Hacker, Ozzy Panzer, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Cam Arslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.